Thank you. Thank you very much, Akhtar. It is wonderful to see a company creating opportunities to so many youth people around the world. Before I introduce you to the next speaker, I would like to announce you that telecenter.org Foundation and Silatech are preparing a memorandum of understanding to bring training and job and entrepreneurship to opportunities to young people in the Middle East and North Africa region. This agreement will allow creation of career and learning centers in this region to empower youth with the skills and opportunity to pursue employment and create their own businesses. It will also allow the connection of marginalized communities with opportunities and learning through mobile phones via Silatech Mobile Works initiative, and it will give more access to e-learning resources in Arabic and English. So I think this agreement needs a big applause, no? Don't you think so? So people use technology to find new work and pursue livelihoods, especially in the current global economy situation. Technology offers many new opportunities to all of us, also in the people to connect. I'm completely lost. So the next speaker I would like to introduce you is called Leila Janah. She founded 4 years ago Samasource, a non-profit that connects people living in poverty to micro work. She will explain to all of us what her work is. So please let's give Leila a warm applause.
Something. What? We work every day. You know, we do content like you guys, you know what happens in the market, and then you get people that tell you what happens in the market when they haven't been in the market. Right? You get a lot of that. I don't have any need, I don't have any desire for that.
Immigrants. My parents came to the United States in the late 1970s, and as hard as they tried, I never learned Hindi, Bengali, or French, my Indian and Belgian parents' mother tongues. So it's very odd that many years later, I stumbled into a word from my father's homeland that resonated with me so much that I used it as the name for 2 organizations, and I even tattooed it on my wrist. Sama means equal in Sanskrit, the ancient Indian language. It's a beautiful word that carries a very powerful meaning: same, level, balanced, fair, in over a dozen languages. Sama is at the root of what I hope to create in the world, a more level playing field for people who do not share equally in the benefits of human progress. Today I will discuss 2 ventures, Samasource and Sama Hope, which both use technology to address fundamental and fixable disparities. When I was 17, I first saw the extent of these disparities. I had traveled to Ghana in West Africa as a volunteer to teach young people English, and I had expected to enlighten my students to the beauty of poetry and literature in English, to Langston Hughes and Emily Dickinson, our major poets. I had visions of saving the world by sharing the gift of English. So you can imagine my surprise when on my first day, one of my students, a skinny 11-year-old boy named Femi Abbas, told me in perfect English that his favorite book was the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Like many students, Femi listened to Voice of America radio and BBC programs and was more up to speed on current events than my peers in high school back at home. Had Femi been born in the United States or in Spain, his talents would have flourished and our story would be over. But Femi had drawn a different ticket in life's birth lottery. His life was characterized by 2 big problems. The first was poverty. His single mother lived on less than $3 a day because she couldn't find decent work. And the second was blindness. Femi was legally blind from a preventable condition that would have been averted if his mother had been able to afford a surgery in his early days. Femi taught me how lucky I was. He and my students were part of the 60% of humanity that survives on less than $2 a day, the people for whom meritocracy is a distant dream. I learned from these students and their families much more than I taught them, and the most profound lesson I learned was that many people living in poverty work, and they actually work full-time. They just don't earn much. This will shock you. 1/3 of the global labor force earns less than $2 a day for a full day's work. A recent book by the chairman of the polling company Gallup found that more than peace, security, food, love, and an end to terrorism, the majority of humans want one thing. They want a good job. This is a photograph I took a few years ago in a mining town in northern India in the state of Jharkhand, which is India's richest state in terms of mineral deposits, but its poorest state in terms of per capita income. In this town, thousands of men make their living by hauling coal on their heads out of mines, loading it up onto bicycles, hauling it 15 miles into town to sell, and on a good day, collecting about $2 in profit. It's hard to believe that the same civilization that ended apartheid and put a man on the moon forces more than 1 billion humans into this kind of low-wage drudgery. But work is not the problem. I think work is the solution. A living wage earned in exchange for good work can transform lives. So many problems linked to health, human rights, education, and gender-based violence have extreme poverty at their root. A living wage allows people to improve their condition on their own terms, to learn new skills, to better themselves, and to contribute meaningfully to their communities. We've heard this before in the old saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him to fish, and feed him for a lifetime. But teaching a man to fish is not enough. I am reminded of a quote by Martin Luther King Jr., which he said just after landmark civil rights legislation had passed in the United States. He said, "What does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't have enough money to afford a hamburger?" In other words, what is the point of fighting for rights and access and even training if people cannot afford to enjoy the basic benefits of human society? King died while he was working to answer a question that still plagues us today. How do we create mass employment in poor communities that pays a living wage? 4 conditions today enable an entirely new form of living wage work. The first is that we live in a dazzling new era of big data. Like our physical universe, the digital universe is quite something to behold. 1.8 trillion gigabytes in 500 quadrillion files, and more than doubling every 2 years. There are more bits of information in the digital universe than there are stars in the known universe. This presents a huge opportunity. Experts estimate that 25% of the information in this digital universe could be useful to companies, to governments, to large organizations and research institutions if it could be tagged and analyzed. But currently we tag only 3% of this information, and we analyze even less. The world of big data includes information like status updates from social media, images, contact information for businesses, and a mind-boggling number of records that are being moved from analog formats into digital formats. Machines can make some sense of this information on their own, but what data scientists have found is that we need human judgments on a massive scale to truly find the signal in the noise. So now we get to condition number 2, which is that we don't need costly physical infrastructure to capture human judgments. As Akhtar alluded, we can do that digitally. The beauty of the kinds of virtual supply chains that collect and process big data is that they remove the constraint of physical infrastructure to create large numbers of jobs. The challenge with the traditional assembly line, which created millions of jobs in the last century, is that manufactured goods require expensive investment in good roads, in waterways, in reliable power to fuel a factory. And most of this simply doesn't exist in the kinds of places where poor people live, in places like the rural area where I took the photograph of that gentleman you saw, or in slums on the outskirts of major cities. But what does exist in those places in tremendous abundance is this: brain power. Condition number 3 is that we've made massive gains in education to harness the brain power of the bottom of the pyramid. Global literacy has skyrocketed in our lifetimes. In Kenya, for example, 95% of people under 30 can read and write in English. But it gets even better. Thanks to Moore's law, which is a pattern that's observed in the high-tech industry, whereby the capacity of a processor, of a chip, doubles every 2 years, the cost of the laptops and the computers required to get all of these newly literate people online is going down dramatically. And this is condition number 4. Declining costs of hardware and internet access make it possible for us to tap into this brain power at a very low cost, to tap into the greatest natural resource on the planet, which is the brain power of the bottom billions. The decline in the cost is really dramatic. Forget the $100 laptop. The Indian Education Ministry, as you know, launched a $35 Android tablet. A credit card-sized computer called the Raspberry Pi launched in 2011 and sold out in 2 hours. It plugs into a TV monitor and a keyboard, and it costs $25. There are over 1 billion computers in the world, over 5 billion phones, and they're all connected. This led me to an epiphany 5 years ago. I had been traveling in Kenya just before the 2007 elections, which had resulted in mass riots on the streets, as you see here. I had thought people were rioting because they were upset about the electoral process or the outcomes. But I later learned that many of the people who filled the images on the news weren't angry. They were working. Several of the youth that you see here on the streets were actually paid $1 a day to riot. It dawned on me that the problem in poverty alleviation was that we had spent all of our time teaching men to fish, but these men lived in deserts for dignified work. I had just read Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, and I thought, if this outsourcing thing was generating billions of dollars for a few entrepreneurs in India and China, why couldn't it generate a few dollars for billions of people in places like sub-Saharan Africa? Why couldn't we convert internet cafes and telecenters in cities like Nairobi, where youth unemployment is staggering, into small digital factories fueled by work from large corporations? Everyone I told about my idea said it wasn't feasible. I wish I had told Akhtar, maybe he would have bought in. They said, you have no experience, you're too young, and poor people in Africa and Asia could never do this kind of work. We have to give them clean water and food before we can give them jobs through the internet. But I disagreed. I thought jobs might help level the playing field. And so, armed with a dream and $10,000 in my life savings, I quit my job and I launched a nonprofit social business called Samasource. Samasource's mission is to connect poor women and youth to work via the internet. Our model has 3 steps. First, we win business through an enterprise sales team based in San Francisco from large corporations with big data problems, firms like eBay, Walmart.com, and LinkedIn, as well as government and nonprofit institutions. Then we put all this data through a technology platform that we built that breaks down big data projects into small tasks and manages the workflow centrally. We coined a new term, micro-work, to describe this model back in 2008. And finally, we employ women and youth in low-income areas to process this data bit by bit from local centers, putting people to work quickly and efficiently without having to spend a lot of time on training. So you can think of our model as outsourcing 2.0, as both teaching a man to fish and ensuring he has access to a river in the digital age. Here's an example of what we do. A parking company came to us a few years back and said, we cannot train our software to determine whether there's a car in each of these parking spots. So Samasource workers look at images on the other side of the world and mark the spots with cars in them. We do this in real time for several major IKEA outlets. Eventually, this data will be used to train computers to do what humans are doing now and recognize cars in the spots. The applications of microwork extend to most large enterprises. Samasource has built product data for eBay and Walmart.com. We've categorized millions of pages of records for universities like the University of California. And we've provided valuable image information to firms like Getty Images. We've secured over 90 customers in just over 4 years and currently recover about 50% of our cost through contract revenue with these companies. But the real success isn't our customer base, it's our impact. To date, we have moved 3,500 workers over the poverty line, and each of these workers supports an average of 3.5 income dependents, younger siblings, relatives, and aging parents who depend on this paycheck to meet basic needs. So this means that capital through our model has flowed from big corporations directly into the pocketbooks of some of the poorest people in the world and has lifted 14,000 people over the poverty line. This is mainly in slums and villages in East Africa, in South Asia, in Haiti, and even in the United States, where we've just launched a pilot. We've shown that women and youth everywhere are capable of achieving their human potential through digital work. Here's a powerful example of what microwork can do. Arfana is a woman I met a couple of months ago in India. She's from a conservative community where women are not allowed to work outside the home, and they must be accompanied by a male chaperone if they leave their houses. Prior to starting at Samasource, Arfana was making ends meet by doing piecemeal embroidery work from home for a local factory. She earned 3 US cents per blouse that she embroidered, and each one would take about 20 minutes. That's about 10 cents for 1 hour of work. She had a high school diploma, and she was desperate for a better life, so she signed up for a training course at our local center. Now, 2 years later, when I met her, Arfana is earning a living wage through Samasource. When I met her, she was busy tagging photographs of Michelle Obama for a project that we had with Getty Images. Arfana told me that she'd bought a cell phone and is now allowed to leave her home without a chaperone because she can call home. And she has her own bank account where she's saving up money to finish college. The only downside to our work with her is that she told me that her favorite website is not CNN or Al Jazeera, but Yahoo Celebrity News. Still, Arfana gives me hope. Samasource is really the first step in a broader vision that I have. I dream of building a family of social enterprises that all use technology in a Sama way to address fundamental injustice around the world. My latest experiment came out of a chance meeting with a retired Texan doctor in a small town in Sierra Leone, also in West Africa. I was there in 2011 on a trip with the State Department looking for Samasource partners, and it quickly became apparent that Sierra Leone was not a good location for digital work. With a literacy rate of under 30% and very low electricity in most parts of the country, it wasn't a good fit for Samasource. But I kept my eyes peeled for other ways to help. A few days into the trip, we visited a hospital in the remote town of Bo and were greeted by local doctors. Their hospital was destitute. The facility had 2 microscopes in the entire teaching wing, no consistent electricity, and almost zero infrastructure. While these doctors were speaking, I overheard a thick accent from the American South coming down the hall and turned around to find a surprising face. It belonged to Dr. Maggi, a retired OBGYN from Texas, discussing a condition called fistula. A fistula is a tear in the vaginal canal that can occur if a woman has complication in giving birth. Fistulas can make women incontinent, effectively crippling them. They can get serious infections, they can lose the ability to work, and they can become completely isolated from their communities. Dr. Maggi explained in the middle of that hospital that 1 in 8 women in Sierra Leone die in childbirth in their lifetimes. He introduced me to women who were in labor for 4 days, lost their children, and then lost their communities and their earning power, compounding the tragedy. Here's one girl that I met in his ward, Tiange Diawo. Tiange was raped at age 12 by a schoolteacher. She lost her baby after a painful birth and then developed a fistula to make matters worse. For 4 years, she suffered at home, unable to attend school because of this condition. I learned that 3 million women like Tiange suffer from fistulas because they lack a few $100s for a simple surgery. And the problem is even bigger than that. About 2 billion people around the world have no access to surgical care for other treatable conditions, such as cleft lip, cataract removal, and third-degree burns. Renowned physician Dr. Paul Farmer calls surgery the neglected stepchild of global health because big foundations are focused on preventative care, which is seen as having a higher return on donor dollars. So they want to fund vaccines and medication. They don't want to fund very costly treatments. So this is a case where we have all of the money and all of the know-how that we need to solve the problem. But because there is so little funding to provide treatment, the bottom 1/3 of humanity receives only 3% of all surgeries performed in the world. While I was talking to Dr. Maggi and before I left Sierra Leone, I came up with a crazy idea. Why not create a crowdfunding platform like Kiva.org or like Kickstarter, where we would fund surgeries instead of microloans or new businesses? If we had such a website, then girls like Tiange would not be kept waiting for years for their surgeries. Femi, my young student back in Ghana, would never have gone blind. And the money could come from average people, people like you and me, rather than large foundations. So I teamed up with 2 co-founders back home, and 6 months later, we launched a website called samahope.org. Samahope allows anyone, anywhere, to fund a medical treatment for a person in need. With just $20, users can browse profiles and apply their funds to a patient in need via PayPal or credit card. We started with fistula patients in Sierra Leone, and we just added burn and cleft palate repair surgeries. Our goal is to fund 1 million treatments in the next 5 years, using social media and the power of the internet to connect people like you to this critical need. With an all-volunteer team, we've now funded over 100 treatments in 3 countries, including cleft palate repair, burn repair, and fistula, and safe birth procedures. Thanks to Samahope, Tiange received her surgery. She was stitched up in just a few hours and has been dry for several months and able to re-enroll in school. Drawing on our experience in tech, we funded many more patients through a massive social media campaign this Mother's Day in the United States about a couple weeks ago called Honor Your Mom, which generated hundreds of tweets and Facebook likes from celebrities. You could post a picture of your mother and make a donation in her name, and she would receive a card in the mail with commemorating the donation, rather than flowers or candles or typical Mother's Day gifts. These 2 Sama ventures, Samasource and Samahope, are still young. We have about 40 employees in 2 offices and far more work than we can manage. The problems that we've chosen to tackle seem really enormous and overwhelming, but I'm hopeful. When things get tough, I go back to the memory of my first days in Africa 13 years ago and to the relentless optimism of my young student Femi Abbas. I remember that the Femis of the world need us to be optimists, and I take great comfort in the words of a famous historian named Howard Zinn back in the US, who said, "To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, of sacrifice, courage, kindness. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. Thank you.